When the mind is unsettled, it does not reveal itself all at once. It begins quietly, like small ripples forming on the surface of a pond. A single thought appears, then another, and then they begin to circle each other, pulling you into their movement. Before you realize it, the water is no longer still. It becomes a storm of possibilities, regrets, worries, and imagined futures. Overthinking is not a single act, but a momentum that builds when we do not see the first ripple. Many people believe their suffering comes from the thoughts themselves, but the real suffering comes from the way we cling to them. A thought is only a thought until we grasp it tightly, give it a name, tie it to our fears, and let it repeat again and again. In this way, the mind becomes a room with no doors, where the same ideas walk in circles. When I was younger, I thought discipline meant forcing the mind to stop its noise. I tried to push thoughts away as if they were intruders, but the more I resisted them, the louder they returned. Overthinking does not end by fighting the mind. It ends by understanding it. A storm quiets not because we demand silence, but because we stop feeding the wind. To free yourself from overthinking, begin by noticing the first sign of turbulence. Notice when a simple thought begins to gather weight. Notice when the mind starts weaving stories around a single worry. Awareness is the moment a wave loses its power. When you see the mind clearly, you no longer drown in it. The storm is strongest only when you believe it is you, but it is only weather, and like all weather, it changes the moment you stop holding on to it. Thoughts visit the mind the way travelers pass through a temple gate. Some arrive quietly, bowing their heads as they enter. Others come rushing in, full of noise and urgency. But whether gentle or wild, every thought shares the same nature. It does not stay. It appears, lingers for a moment, and then moves on. The trouble begins only when we mistake these guests for permanent residents. When you overthink, it is because you have offered certain thoughts a place to live. You give them a room, a bed, and your attention. You feed them with fear, memory, or imagination, and soon they begin to multiply. One thought becomes 10, 10 become 100, and then it feels as if your mind is no longer yours. To free yourself, you must learn to treat thoughts the way monks treat visitors, with kindness, but without attachment. When a thought appears, acknowledge it gently. You may say within yourself, "Worry is here," or "Fear is here." Naming a thought creates just enough distance for you to recognize it is not you. It is simply something passing through your awareness. Do not chase the thought away. Do not argue with it. Do not invite it to stay. Let it pass, like watching someone walk down a long corridor. You are only the observer, not the host. Many people are surprised at how quickly the mind settles when they stop trying to control it. Thoughts lose their power when you no longer fight them or follow them. They drift in, and they drift out. What once felt like a flood becomes a quiet flow. When you see thoughts as passing guests, the mind becomes spacious again. You begin to rediscover the stillness that was always underneath, waiting patiently for you to return. The mind loves to wander far from where the body is standing. It travels into yesterday, searching for mistakes. It moves into tomorrow, imagining trouble that has not yet arrived. And while the mind runs in all directions, the body remains here, breathing quietly, asking nothing. Overthinking grows strongest when the mind forgets the simple truth that life can only be lived in this moment. When your thoughts begin to spiral, the first thing to do is return to the body. Feel the weight of your feet on the ground. Notice the rise and fall of your breath, not changing it, simply following its rhythm. Sense the temperature of the air on your skin. These may seem like small things, but they anchor the mind the way a stone anchors a lantern in the wind. Many people imagine presence as something mystical, but in truth, it is very ordinary. It is the feeling of being exactly where you are. It is the gentle awareness of your breath moving in and out like waves on a quiet shore. It is noticing the tightness in your chest and allowing it to soften. When you return to the body, you return to a place where thoughts lose their urgency. Overthinking thrives in the realm of the imagined, but the body does not imagine, it only experiences. When you shift attention from mind to body, You step out of the stories that cause suffering and into the simple reality of this moment. Even a single deep breath can interrupt the cycle of endless thinking, because the breath happens now, not in the past or future. With practice, you begin to trust this returning. You discover that the body is not merely a vessel, but a doorway to calm. And each time the mind wanders, you know there is a path back, a quiet path that leads you away from the storm and into the steadiness of the present. When people hear the word discipline, they often imagine force, effort, or strict control. But the discipline that frees you from overthinking is not harsh. It is a soft, steady attention, a way of noticing without judgment, without tightening the heart. Gentle attention is the practice of watching the mind the way an old monk watches the sky, patient, unhurried, and deeply accepting of whatever appears. Overthinking begins when attention becomes tangled. You follow one thought, then another, and soon the mind is running faster than you can keep up. Gentle attention untangles this knot by slowing the pace. When a thought arises, you notice it lightly. When it fades, you let it fade without comment. You neither grasp it nor resist it. You simply remain aware. This kind of discipline cannot be forced. If you try too hard, the mind becomes tense, and tension feeds more thinking. Instead, approach the mind the way you would approach a frightened animal, quietly, with open hands. When your attention is kind, the mind begins to relax. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer have the same sharpness. They move slowly, like clouds drifting across an autumn sky. There is a saying among monks, where attention rests, the mind follows. If your attention rests on worry, the mind becomes worried. If it rests on regret, the mind becomes heavy. But if it rests on simple awareness, breath, posture, stillness, the mind gradually takes the shape of clarity. Gentle attention shapes the mind without force, the way water shapes stone. With time, this discipline becomes a daily companion. You begin to notice when the mind starts to run. You pause before being swept away. Even in the middle of work or conversation, you feel a quiet thread of awareness that keeps you steady. Overthinking loses its power not because it disappears, but because you have learned to meet it with softness rather than fear. Gentle attention is not a technique, it is a way of living, and through it the mind learns to rest in its natural state, open, spacious, and at peace. Overthinking does not arise from nowhere. It grows from roots buried deep within us. Old fears, unspoken desires, unresolved memories, and the quiet ache of wanting life to be different from what it is. When the mind becomes restless, it is often because the heart is carrying something it has not yet faced. To free yourself, you must gently look beneath the surface and understand what is asking for your attention. Most people try to calm their thoughts without listening to their deeper needs. They polish the surface while ignoring the stone beneath it, but the mind cannot become still if the heart is in conflict. Restlessness is a signal, not an enemy. It points towards something that needs care, a sadness you haven't sat with, a disappointment you haven't forgiven, a fear you keep pushing away. When these are left unattended, they whisper through your thoughts again and again. Understanding the roots of restlessness begins with honesty. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding? Often the answer is simple, but uncomfortable. Perhaps you fear losing what you love, or failing in what you pursue. Perhaps you carry loneliness or longing. These truths are not weaknesses, they are part of being human. When you acknowledge them, the mind stops trying to shout them into your awareness. Do not rush this process. The heart opens slowly, like a flower that blooms only when the sun is gentle. Sit with your feelings the way you sit with a friend who needs to speak. Listen without interruption. Sometimes understanding does not come in words, but in a quiet sense of clarity that settles in the chest. When you recognize the true source of your restlessness, overthinking begins to lose its fuel. The mind no longer needs to circle the same worries because the heart is finally being heard. What once felt like a storm begins to feel like rain, a natural part of life, passing through, nourishing the soil beneath you. Many people believe stillness can only be found in meditation halls or during long moments of silence. But true stillness is not limited to quiet places. It can be woven into the smallest movements of your daily life. You do not escape overthinking by stopping the world around you. You free yourself by learning to move through the world without being carried away by your thoughts. When you walk, walk with awareness. Feel each step as the foot meets the ground. Sense the rhythm of your body shifting from one side to the other. Even a brief walk to another room can become a moment of calm if your attention rests fully on the movement. The mind becomes steady when the body moves with intention. When you wash your hands, feel the temperature of the water. Notice the texture of the soap, the sound of the water falling, the way your fingers glide against one another. This simple act, done with presence, becomes a small sanctuary. Overthinking loosens its grip when you give your senses space to speak. Even everyday chores can become gateways to stillness. When you fold laundry, let each fold be deliberate. When you pour tea, let the sound guide your breathing. These actions anchor you. They remind you that life is not lived in your worries, but in your direct experience of this moment. Stillness in movement is not about slowness, it is about attention. Even when life is busy, you can carry a quiet center within you. A monk does not find peace because his surroundings are peaceful. He finds peace because he brings awareness into everything he does. When your movements become mindful, the mind naturally begins to settle. Thoughts may still arise, but they no longer scatter your attention. Instead, they pass through a mind grounded in the simplicity of the present. And in these ordinary moments, you discover an extraordinary truth. Stillness is already here, waiting in every breath and every step. A mind free from overthinking is not a mind without thoughts. It is a mind that no longer clings to them, no longer builds stories around them, no longer confuses their passing nature with the truth of who you are. Freedom does not come from silence, it comes from spaciousness. When thoughts arise, they have room to move. When they fade, they leave no trace behind. To live with such a mind, you must understand that clarity is not something you achieve once and hold forever. It is renewed moment by moment, the way a garden is tended each day. Some days will feel calm, and some will feel unsettled. This is not failure, it is simply the movement of life. What changes is not the number of thoughts, but your relationship to them. When fear appears, you recognize it and let it pass. When worry arises, you do not turn it into a story. When old memories drift through, you bow to them gently and allow them to continue on their way. You do not push away what arrives, and you do not chase after what leaves. The mind becomes like an open window, through which the breeze moves freely. In this openness, a quiet confidence begins to grow. You realize you do not need to control every outcome or solve every uncertainty. You understand that life unfolds at its own pace, and that much of your suffering came from trying to force it into shapes it was never meant to take. When the mind stops clinging, the world feels lighter, even when circumstances remain the same. Living with a mind that does not cling does not remove challenges from your life, but it changes how you meet them. Instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of tightening, you soften. Instead of being swept away, you remain grounded. Overthinking no longer becomes your default because you have learned to rest in presence rather than in fear. And slowly, almost without realizing it, you begin to live in a deeper rhythm, one where thoughts come and go, the heart remains open, and each moment is met with a calm that does not depend on perfection. This is the quiet freedom the Buddha pointed toward, a mind that is clear, spacious, and unbound.